Good afternoon. Hey, this is Jim Humphrey. I'm a field specialist in livestock and want to welcome you all to our April 22nd Forage and Livestock Virtual Town Hall. I think we have a really nice program lined up for you today. I will be your host. Your co-host today is Valerie Tate. Valerie has changed her name, if you're not familiar with Zoom, to ask questions here. And if you would like to ask a question, you can send that directly to ask questions here. It'll be kept private. And Valerie will share it throughout the next hour or so, however long we're on the program. Or if you want to send it to everybody, you can just send it to everyone and then everybody will see it. And again, we will try to get that question answered for you by our panelist, as well as maybe somebody else on the call if we need to. So look forward to having our session here. Pat Guinan is going to have a weather report for us again today, as he always does an excellent job for us, keeping us up to date on our weather. And we know how crazy it has been this year here in Missouri. And then after that, Dr. Jimmy Henning from University of Kentucky is going to talk about the basics of haymaking. And it has a really nice presentation for us put together. And
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'll go right into it. And it's been an interesting week, the past couple mornings, and I just want to provide some perspective on this freeze event we've experienced here in Missouri the past couple mornings. And indeed, it was historic, where several locations over the past 2 mornings have broken some record lows, and that's not a good thing to happen, especially at the end of April. On the left are some of the minimum temperatures from yesterday morning, and you can see statewide, we experienced freezing conditions across Missouri. Many locations dropped into the 20s, even down into the southeastern tip of the Boot Hill, it reached freezing, which is highly unusual for this time of year. I circled some of the coldest numbers that we experienced here in Missouri yesterday morning. You could see mid-20s, even some lower 20s. And down in the Ozarks area around Round Spring, and then at the Vichy Airport in Marys County got down to 22, some really cold temperatures. And on the right, unfortunately, we hit 2 consecutive mornings with these cold temperatures. And again, very similar to in the 20s in some locations. There were some clouds that moved through southern Missouri overnight, and clouds is a good thing in that regard. It keeps those minimum temperatures elevated. It sort of acts like a blanket, and so you don't get that full radiational cooling that you could get. And so numbers this morning across southern parts of the state, especially southwestern Missouri, where there was more cloud cover, they weren't as bad or as low as they were yesterday morning. Still, though, look at western sections of Missouri for this morning with the map on the right. Yesterday morning, there were some clouds in west central Missouri that actually kept those minimum temperatures up, but they didn't get that last night. And so the temperatures this morning, especially across west central sections, were a few degrees colder, and you can see some reports in the mid, even lower 20s. I put those red circles on the right side of the map to show the lowest temperatures, and you can see St. Joseph at the airport. That's, of course, on a floodplain, and, you know, in those low-lying areas, it can get a few degrees colder than a nearby hilltop, and that was the case. And if you go southeastward over in around near Kearney, Missouri, just east of there, in Clay County, and over in Ray County in Richmond, south of Richmond, they got down to 22 degrees in western Missouri. And of course, around the Ozark areas, the Ozark Plateau, you have some low-lying areas where that cold air can drain and really cause some cold temperatures. And we saw that in Rosebud and Gasconade County, and over at Osage Beach, and in Cook Station at the Wardeck Farm in Crawford County, and again down in Round Spring. So 2 very cold mornings with some low record low temperatures. I have been getting some questions in regard to these historic days and the cold temperatures, how it compared to what happened 14 years ago in April. We had it was called the Easter freeze. It was a different sort of freeze event. In my opinion, it was a more harsh one that impacted our state. And I remember it like yesterday. There was a lot of impacts, not only in Missouri, but extended all the way to North Carolina. But you could see in the upper left how some of the estimates, the economic assessments that came out of that 2007 Easter freeze, the core of that cold air occurred over Easter weekend on April 7th and April 8th. and all the many ag sectors, horticulture sectors took a hit, and that includes alfalfa took a hit, the cool season grasses. It was just a bad situation. Upper right is an indication of what happened that led up to that event and all that damage. We had one of our warmest Marches, especially that period from March 21st to April 3rd. We were running 20 degrees above normal for that period. That was a period that was more like late April and early May. And so vegetation really took a growth to that came out of dormancy. And unfortunately, you can see is on that chart in the upper right, those blue indicates an Arctic blast that came through and dropped those temperatures from going 20 degrees above normal to nearly 20 degrees below normal, almost within a 24 to 48 hour period. On the lower left, look at those temperatures. That's how low it got during that 6-day period. Those were some of the lowest temperatures. We did not experience that over the past couple of days. Many locations in Missouri, they dropped into the teens and the lower 20s. Joplin, Missouri broke an all-time low temperature record for the entire month of April when they dropped down to 19 on the morning of April 8th. And then the bottom right, you can see those numbers in regard to the number of hours where it stayed below various temperature thresholds, below 32 degrees, below 24 degrees. Nothing of the magnitude or longevity of what we saw over the past couple of days versus what happened during the big Easter freeze of 2007. So we obviously, with these past week or so of cooler temperatures, we've actually been running below normal over the past 10 to 12 days. The soil temperatures have also gone down accordingly. On the left, these are the average 2-inch soil temperatures under bare soil. They've been only running in the middle to upper 40s across northern Missouri and generally in the lower 50s across much of the rest of the state. You have to go down to far southeastern Missouri to have average weekly temperatures in the upper 50s. And right in Steele, Missouri, in southeastern Pemiscot County is the only location that averaged about 60 degrees with their 2-inch bare soil temperature. On the right, we are seeing finally, hopefully this is an end to all the freezing weather, at least for this spring. Climatologically, we've reached our median date across the state where we would anticipate our last 32-degree temperature. I think over the next week to 10 days, I don't see any sign of seeing any more temperatures going at or below freezing. So that's good news in that regard. The soil temperatures as of 11:15 this morning on the right, you can see they're starting to warm up with the full sunshine, generally still in the 40s across parts of northern Missouri, but dipping in or getting up into the lower 50s. And much of southern Missouri, southern half of the state, they're already up into the 50s. It does look like this cool weather is going to continue. No freezing weather, thankfully, but cool conditions for today. It's nice to see the sunshine. We'll get a little bit of rebound at highs in the mid-50s to around 60 across the state. There is another system that is forecast to bring some more rain to our area. And starting later today, late today, we'll see the clouds increase from west to east across western Missouri. That'll translate eastward overnight. And those chances of showers will start increasing as we go into tonight and through much of the day tomorrow and into Saturday morning. There is a forecast of a pretty good amount of showers and thunderstorms, perhaps even across southern Missouri over the next couple of days. That again, starting tonight into Friday. Things will start to wind down on Saturday. It does look like the latter part of the weekend will be beautiful on Sunday with sunny skies and more seasonable weather, highs around 70. I will say average highs this time of year are around the mid-60s in northern Missouri, upper 60s in central parts of the state, and into the lower 70s over southern Missouri. So finally, it looks like a return to more seasonable conditions as we go into the weekend. This is the forecasted precipitation over the next 7 days. It does look like we have an unsettled pattern setting up. There are two notable systems that will be impacting Missouri over the next 7 days, and so I've broken it up. On the left, you can see this is the forecast over the next 3 days. I talked about the rain chances starting tonight into Friday and Saturday morning. You can see heaviest likelihood of the highest likelihood of heavier precipitation over the southern half of the state, as much as 1 inch to 1.5 inches. We already have somewhat wet conditions across southwestern Missouri, a little bit drier as you go over south central and southeastern Missouri. Some locations in southeast Missouri have only seen about a little over 1 inch of rain during the entire month of April. So they actually could probably stand to see a little bit more wetter weather in far southeastern sections. Lighter amounts as you go north, but nonetheless, it does look like the entire state over the next few days will pick up some precipitation. As we go into next week, look at the map on the right. That is the forecast starting midweek Generally, it starts the morning of Tuesday, April 27th through Thursday, April 29th. That's another notable system that could drop heavier precipitation totals across all of Missouri, anywhere from about an inch to an inch and a half. So if you accumulate both these maps over southern Missouri, they can see anywhere from 2 to as much as 3 inches of rain over the next 7 days. So obviously that'll be something to pay attention to, and perhaps even some localized flooding, especially over southwestern parts of the state, if this forecast verifies. I will mention also much warmer conditions starting on Monday, highs near 80. Tuesday, again, a highs near 80. We're going to tap into some more Gulf of Mexico moisture, and it's actually going to feel like May somewhat, or late April, with more humid conditions and the possibility for severe weather. That's something to keep an eye on for late in the day on Tuesday and especially Wednesday. There could be some severe weather affecting this part of the country. So, and it is severe weather season. May is typically our most severe weather season in regard to thunderstorms and tornadoes and hail and things of that nature. So something to keep an eye on by midweek is the potential for some severe weather. This is the forecast over the next 6 to 10 days. That'll take us from April 27th to May 1st. On the left, you can see those temperatures. They are actually indicating a little bit of an enhanced likelihood of above normal temperatures as we, again, in the 80s early next week. I would say that looks like forecasting highs in the 70s for much of the rest of next week with those chances of precipitation. And you can see the map on the right, that those greens are indicative of an enhanced likelihood of above normal precipitation. So it does seem like an unsettled and warmer pattern finally setting up as we go into next week. And again, we have these cooler conditions over the next couple of days with some pretty good chances of rain starting tonight into Friday and Saturday morning. And that's pretty much a weather wrap up. I think it was it Jim that I was speaking with earlier? I'm sorry, I didn't
Yes.
get the names as I was having some problems. But Jim, thank you so much. I'll hand it back over to you.
Again, thank you, Dr. Guinan, for your work each week on this. It's very, very valuable, and I know it's a valued part of our program. Miss Valerie, do we have any questions for Dr. Guinan?
There are no questions at this time.
Okay. Okay. Well, next up, we have Dr. Jimmy Henning, who is going to do a presentation for us on the basics of haymaking. As probably several of you know, Jimmy was here in the state of Missouri for about 7 years, I believe in the 90s, and mostly in the 90s. And I have not had the great pleasure of meeting him, but I've seen some of the work he's done. And I think maybe even some of you all were some of his graduate students. I'm not sure on that, but Jimmy Henning is an extension professor and extension state forage specialist in the Department of Plant and Soil Science at the University of Kentucky. His extension program focuses on hay and haylage production and the nutritional quality, as well as pastures, establishment, and management. He is a co-founder of the Kentucky Grazing Schools and the University of Kentucky Forage Variety Testing Program. Dr. Henning has served in extension administration for 14 years, including almost 10 years as the Associate Dean of Cooperative Extension at the University of Kentucky. He did return back to the faculty level in 2017. He is a graduate of the University of Georgia, University of Kentucky, and the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture. And he is also a native of Guinan, Oklahoma. We do welcome you, Dr. Henning, being with us today, and really thank you for coming back to the state of Missouri and being a part of our program. I am going to turn it over to you and let you share your screen.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I do want to, again, thank you for the invitation. I wish, like so many of our meetings, that we could do this face-to-face. Like I learned a great deal while I was at the University of Missouri and enjoyed my interactions there quite a bit. But what I want to share with you today is some very basic material on making quality stored forage. And for the most part, we're going to talk about making hay, but I will make mention of some work that we have been doing with baled silage because we seem to be making a whole lot more of that. And the weather could be driving that, but so let's go ahead and get started. I do want to talk a little bit about and mention at least a couple of publications, particularly these two, the AGR 62, which is one of our UK pubs on quality hay production. and this one, which is the best practices to hasten field drying of grasses and alfalfa from the University of Wisconsin, which has some really, really good information about how how we bale our mower conditioners, how we swath it, how that affects our the drying rates of hay. And I would say that anything that I mention or a call out, you can get to it pretty easy on our UK Forages homepage. Just by I don't even go to I don't even try to type the HTTPS. I just type in UKY Forages, and it'll be at the top of your search engine results, and you can see how we organize that. You can also see that we have got extensive numbers of videos on our Kentucky Forages YouTube page. But let's get into the meat of the presentation. I want to talk about best practices for quality stored forage, and I want to make sure that we've got the whole context in mind here. Quality stored forage doesn't start with cutting it down and trying to get it into a bale. It starts with growing it, and it goes all the way to the point of feeding. Now, for the purposes of our discussion today, we want to talk about primarily the harvesting through storage section of this presentation, of this process. Just so that I'm fair and kind of give you the full context, we want to make sure that we do what we need to do to grow the crop. And that means we start with good varieties, managing our soil fertility so that it's going to produce the yield we want, controlling the weeds, and having the right crop that we need to produce the quality and the yield that we need. And you just really can't walk past this and ignore it. That this is basic to setting ourselves up to make the kind of stored forage crop that you need. But let's get into harvesting. This is the kind of mowing equipment that I used to use, and on my very first job on a hay crew, this is what they laid the hay down with. And of course, it was very simple. It's inexpensive. Doesn't take much of a tractor to run one of these sickle bar mowers. But if you hit something, you hit a rock, you hit something, you will break one of these sections, and then you're down. You go and go back to the shop, pull the bar out, fix the section, and then put it back in, and you're a lot careful the next time that you do it. It has some downsides. It's it is cheap, but it doesn't cut very fast, and it doesn't cut in some of the very thick materials very well at all. And as you can see, it really doesn't have much in the way of adjustments in terms of height, which we will mention in a little bit. And height of cutting is getting to be more and more important for the persistence of some of our cool season grasses. Of course, disc mowers have taken over Kentucky for sure, and they're the most common type of mowing machine that you find. And this is, again, an ultra simple one. And I'm sure you're familiar with the concept, and these very short stubby blades rotating at a high rate of speed. They're more expensive than the sickle bar mower, but they are quite tough and can get through some thick forage crops. But one of the things that you find on some of the very simple models or low-end models is the lack of the ability to, again, adjust the heights. Some of the newer mowing machines are going to have that ability to adjust the height up and down as you need it, depending on the crop and the location. And even some of them have quick release blades that you can go in and put a blade in that has a bit more of a loft or an angle to it that creates more suction to maybe work with a crop that has lodged. And I told you that we would mention at least some of the importance of the cutting height on our perennial cool season grasses. And for us, tall fescue and orchard grass are going to make up the bulk of our first cuttings of hay. And I know that's true for a good bit of Missouri, especially South Missouri. And what we are finding, whether it's the climate getting warmer, I'm not sure. All I know is that we are able to measure temperature differences and temperature warming way down in the soil when we cut low to the ground. We did a little experiment in Western Kentucky, not too far from the boot heel, where we cut some fescue sod or fescue hay at 1 inch versus 3 inches. And we were able to see temperature differences of 15 degrees at the crown in midsummer. And we could follow that temperature change down 4 inches into the soil. So we want to get the cutting height up for perennial cool season grasses. Now, when we have a mix, in other words, if you're looking at a orchard grass alfalfa, brome grass alfalfa mix, then your cutting height is going to, the lower it is, the more the alfalfa or the legume has the advantage. So in fact, some of our very savvy hay producers will, if they feel like they want to get more alfalfa in the next cutting, they'll lower the cut down a little bit, and vice versa. If they want to keep the grass strong and let it have the advantage, then they'll raise up the cutter bar, if that makes sense. This is a visual representation, and we did this little time-lapse photography project where we cut orchard grass. And again, these are greenhouse grown plants. So they are obviously started out in really good shape and in a good environment with plenty of water. Cut the one on the left at 1 inch. Now we did it 4 times in a row within a month, and cut once in that month at 3.5 on the right. But you can see the difference that close and frequent defoliation causes on the ability of orchard grass to come back. Then, we move up one step above just the regular disc mowers, and these are the disc binds, some version of a conditioning mower. And the conditioning, whether it's done by, as the picture here is a intermeshing rollers, or whether it's done by other ways, is going to speed up the drying of stems. And so one of the issues that we have, especially with crops like alfalfa, red clover, the tall growing summer annual grasses, and to some degree, some of our cool season grasses in the first cutting, is that the stems dry slower than the leaves. And when we get that big differential in moisture content between the stems and leaves, and then you start manipulating that crop, then you start losing leaves, and while you're waiting for the stems to dry. And so that the conditioning mowers will crush or crimp or abrade the stems so that they dry faster. And while these are more expensive, they're more complex machines, they take more horsepower. If we're going to raise and try to make dry hay out of some of these, the alfalfa, red clover, tall growing summer annuals, then we must have, or I highly recommend that we have the mower conditioners. This is a bit more of a close-up of that conditioning roller. And I would be oversimplifying things to say that these don't have issues. We have to, how well they work will depend on how well you adjust them, both the gap and the pressure. And there's some very, very good publications on how to take a bit of aluminum foil, roll it around a pencil, and remove the pencil, then move the aluminum foil through these rollers, and then measure how tight it crimps. And so there are different tolerances for different machines, but the way that they are adjusted will impact how well they work. And the research, though, is pretty clear. You can save, say, a half a day's curing and even more, depending on the weather conditions, by using a conditioning mower, either type, any type, versus just a mower alone. There's probably we could have a great debate about whether we should use impeller or flail type conditioner versus a roller crimper type conditioner. And the flail's on the left, and the intermeshing roller type is on the right. There are many kinds of flails. There are those like you see with the metal V's that actually then are free to swing. that bar will rotate quickly and pull the hay up off of the discs or the area where it's cut. It'll throw it up against a screen and throw it back into the swath. And there are adjustments, both speed of how fast it goes and how much space between the panel or the cover and those those rotating impellers, and they will impact how much leaf you knock off and how fast you dry. But both types do work. And until about, I don't know, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I would have said, we just don't see the flail type mowers anymore. And lo and behold, I show up at a field day and they've got an equipment dealer, and what's he showing? Flail type mowers. Flail type conditioning mowers. So, they are cheaper, probably a little easier to adjust. And there are reasons to use them. Certainly, we'll talk about grasses versus legumes in these type conditioners here. This is a picture of a crimped alfalfa stem through the intermeshing roller on the left, and alfalfa stem that's gone through an impeller on the right. And you can see the kind of conditioning that is done. We've got maybe a crushed stem and the stem is broken, so that we can have more ways for water to get out of that stem. And then you've got the impeller, which has scraped, some of the epidermis off of the stem, and the leaves and the stems are covered with a waxy layer that really their purpose in life is to keep water in the plant. And so when we're trying to make dry hay, we've got to kind of, just either wait our turn, wait for the good sun and good warm days to get the water out of the plant, or help find ways, give ways for water to leave the plant. But that don't mean going through that epidermis. Just to give you an idea of the quantities of losses you might see with different kind of conditioners. This is no conditioner here, which basically no loss. A rubber crimping roller, you do get some loss, some leaf loss. That steel flail I've seen numbers that will run from 4 to 6 or 7% dry matter loss. And then there are plastic type flails that some of them are rigid, and they are a little bit more gentle on the crop in terms of yield loss. And when we talk about dry matter loss, it's not, we lose a great many more leaves. So this is going to be leaf loss primarily, because we seem to be able to get all of the stems into the bale. Getting all the leaves into the bale sometimes is not as easy. I like this picture. It shows you what it looks like when you've sent an alfalfa plant through the intermeshing roller type conditioners on the right, and a flail conditioner on the left. And you can see that we have, at least to me, it looks obvious that we've got less leaf tissue remaining on those stems. But to really get down to, how are we going to get quality hay to the barn, we got to focus on this. We've got to talk about maturity at cutting, because it's the most important factor affecting forage quality. End of story, end of statement. I'm sure that you've seen this graph before, but I'd want to remind you that, as we progress in the spring, for example, or throughout primarily in the spring, because this is showing our grasses going from vegetative to head stage. The things that we want, like digestibility and intake, are going to go down as we get more mature. And something else that we want good yield, it goes up. So it's quite logical that, we're going to have to find a compromise somewhere in here. And I teach undergrad students, and a lot of times they'll say, I'll say to them, where's the best time to cut? And of course they just pick one of these intersecting points, right? That's what they want. And logically that's correct. But life is more complicated than just picking the intersection of two lines going in opposite directions. And I'm sure that 100% of you would get this right if I asked you this. The main challenge in making dry hay, this is it. It's rain, and all things being equal, my first 4 years at the University of Missouri, or in Missouri, were drought years. And frankly, I have a hard time not liking rain for that reason. But, weather is fickle. We think we've got 3 good curing days and it turns into 2 or less, and a shower comes out of nowhere. But we're trying. Well, I guess what I want to say is I don't want to oversimplify the fact that making quality hay is as simple as cutting earlier. While yes, it is, there are other things that are competing with the ability to do just that. Now, this is in our AGR 62, and you can look this up. I mean, the recommended cutting stage, and I'd recommend that you take a look at this and learn what there is to learn from a table like this. But what I would have you remember is that the best time to cut hay, obviously, is when it's not going to rain. But the best stage to cut hay is that transition from vegetative or early head to or boot to early head, or flower, bud to first flower for legumes. Now, I want to just make mention of the problem with using some forages that have narrow harvest windows. And the one I'm thinking of is cereal rye. The quality change in cereal rye is it goes from, this is Batesville, Arkansas, which is about, 3 or 4 counties south of the Boot Heel of Missouri. So about on the line with Nashville. But as you can see, from March 24 to April 15, this is the digestibility of wheat. And this is the digestibility of rye. And going from the vegetative or boot stage to where the head begins to come out in rye, the quality goes from dairy quality to, cow quality. And and wheat is much more forgiving. And for that reason, I like wheat. And I want to show you another picture. This is rye at the boot stage to early head, taken 2 days ago, the 20th, here in Lexington. But these plants were within 5 feet of each other. So again, it's not as simple as just saying, okay, I'm looking for, the boot stage or when the head starts coming out to cut this down, because it's going to be somewhat variable across the field depending on the variety. If you talk to commercial haymakers, they will have many strategies to deal with uncertain weather, cutting us, putting less hay down at a time if the weather is a little uncertain. So if it does rain, they don't lose as much. But they will tell you at some point in time, you need to cut your first cutting as nearly on time as you can, even if the weather is uncertain, because it sets up every cutting to come. All right. Just a strategy to have. It's not the be all end all advice for making quality hay, but sometimes you just got to cut it. And I also want to make this point that there are very, very few really bad hays, but there are a lot of bad diets. And the problem is that we don't test hay. And I know, because this is one of the first things we did at the University of Missouri when I got there was survey producers about who tested hay. 90% said that they don't. Well, shame on me. I'm the forage extension guy, right? I need to convince them otherwise. And I don't know that I did, but I certainly, made the point that if you don't know the quality of your hay, you can have train wrecks. And we did a couple of years back here in Kentucky, because we make a great many tons of just plain old fescue hay, cow hay, and people feed it year in and year out, don't get a test and seem to get by. And then we had one of those muddy, cold, wet winters that didn't really freeze, right? But we had a lot of cattle that were outside with wet hides, and we're feeding that same old immature fescue hay, which has worked in years past. But it introduced our farmers and me to the concept of the thermoneutral zone. And that is that when you drop, when the hide is wet, the thermoneutral temperature goes from like 18 degrees for a cow to when they're dry to 55 degrees. And that means for every 10 degrees below 55 degrees, you need about 5% more digestibility in the hay. And we had plenty of 35-degree days with rain. And therefore we had some hays that were not just a little bit out of shape. They were a lot short in energy, and we actually lost cows due to starvation. That surprised producers that you would have thought would know. And it's simply a fact that they didn't know the quality of the hay, and they did not make an adjustment for the weather. I've done some pencil farming here, and forgive me, but you know, if it's like the definition of insanity. If you don't, I mean, the definition of insanity is expecting a different result when you do the same thing over and over again, right? So if we don't like making spring cuttings of hay because we get them rained on, what can we do? And here's my pencil farming list, right? Make baleage. We'll talk about that at the end. It gives us some help in managing weather. Fertilize for the aftermath cuttings. In other words, second and beyond for those crops that will produce that. For us, orchard grass will give us a second and sometimes a third cut, depending on the soil and the rainfall in the year. And then plant one of the summer hay crops. And I've listed alfalfa and orchard grass as summer crops. They are, in fact, cool season forages, but they tend to, at least for us, will produce into the summer and give us some regrowth cuttings. The regrowth cuttings of orchard grass, of course, are all blade and some of the most marketable hay that we can make. And then you've got a long list of warm season grasses, Caucasian blue stem native warm season grasses, Bermuda grass, and teff. And all of those are options, not simple, not cheap sometimes, but they are options then to try to avoid relying so heavily on making hay with fescue or brome in the spring. Let's talk a little bit about curing, and I got about 10 minutes left, and I want to stay timely and on time. This is a stylized drying curve of forage from fresh cut at 80% down to hay moisture down here at 20. Our goal is to get to 18 to 22%. That's square bale, safe moisture, as fast as we can. We lose a lot of water very fast. I mean, we go from 80 to 60 in, just a few hours or less because our stomates are still open, right? So we're losing water through every opening the plant has. These close down at some point. And then the windrow architecture, the sunlight, the wind, whether we've conditioned or not, will affect this section of the curve. And this final section is plain old out sunlight and heat that's going to get you down here. So, it takes that long, and that's exactly what the drying curve looks like. The better the weather, the shorter the time. Another topic that has been researched and will create quite a discussion is, what time should I cut? And I'm going to cut to the chase. We should cut early in the day and use wide swaths. Cutting early in the day, or let's go backwards, cutting later in the day allows the plant will actually kind of, the sugar content will rise in forage crops. And we can measure that throughout the day from morning to mid-afternoon or so. But if we don't cut in time enough for the moisture content to fall below 60%, by the time the humidity comes up in the evening, then the plant will respire all through the night and burn off all that extra sugar. So for us, in our environment, it's better for us to cut earlier in the day. And yes, we'll give up that little bit of extra sugar that we might have gotten from cutting later in the day, because we gain that full day of drying. And the other thing is to lay it down in as wide a swath as possible if we're making hay, because the drying rate is going to be directly proportional to how much sunlight we intercept. This is some really good work out of the University of Wisconsin. This is May, and it's going to be an alfalfa cutting, but this is putting it in a narrow swath. That's the reddish pinkish line, and then the dotted line is the wide swath. And you can see that this wound up getting to hay moisture exactly 1 day sooner with a wide swath compared to a narrow swath. Tedding is a tool we can use. Many producers will swear by them. Others will swear at them. The ones that swear at them are the ones that are really trying to save leaves and to handle the crop as gently as they can. Now they still use them, don't get me wrong. But they try to TED when we've got about 40 to 50% moisture content still in the crop. Of course, grasses are going to lose less leaves than legumes if you need to come in and Ted after a rain event, or say it just laid down really tight behind the mower. Raking for us, we have a great many more wheel rakes than we do rotating or bar rakes. These need to be adjusted so that they don't drag too much in the soil and move too much dirt towards the windrow or into the windrow. And we also need to try to handle the crop when it's got some moisture in it as well. Moving into baling really quick. We have different target moistures for different size balers. And this will get a discussion going in Kentucky for sure, because this is what the research says, is that the small rectangular traditional square bales can, 18 to 22% moisture content will keep in that bale. Large round bales, 15 to 18, large rectangular bales, 12 to 16. And 10 years ago, I would have said, we just can't get dry enough in Kentucky to support very many of those balers right there. But guess what? That's in Lexington, Kentucky, and is making a 4x4 bale just as fast as he can go. Now you'll notice he's got a hay preservative applicator on that baler, but we do have to get drier to make for these packages to keep. Now I know that, in Missouri, you've got some more arid conditions than we do. And you may be able to, it's probably just like us, you're seeing some of these come in, maybe even a lot of them come in for multitudes of reasons. And I will mention a little bit about hay preservatives. I've done a little bit of hay preservative work, enough to know that that we need to have the acid type products. They're the ones that are proven effective, that the economic sweet spot is really when you're trying to bale it just over the right moisture content, and you're probably dealing with high value material that you're trying to keep from molding and heating. The easiest system to make work, in my opinion, is where you have moisture sensors, moisture content sensors in the bale wall, so that the baler senses the moisture and it's connected to the pump for these preservative applicators, so that you've got a bit of a real-time adjustment there in the rate of acid that is applied. And then I've just got this one slide here on round bale silage, just because we have explored this so much over the last 3 years. We know that, these are the keys to making good round bale silage. And if we do these things, then, we get a consistent high quality product. Cut early, so we have sugars to ferment. Wilt it down to 40 to 60% moisture content. And that's easier said than done for a lot of reasons. And it's also harder than you think to hit that moisture content just right. We know that when the moisture is closer to 60, we ferment better than when it's closer to 40. But if you're, at any moisture content, baling in tight uniform bales and wrapping with 6 layers of plastic are going to be key for it to keep. And of course, keep the holes taped until feeding, or plugged until feeding. A little bit about storage, because I wanted to mention some things about wraps that are new. Hay storage is really managing weather damage. And this is from South Central Kentucky. Soon after I came here several years ago, and I saw this driving down the road, and I had to stop because this producer had put bales out here in, they're stored outside, and quite obviously they've been there a little while, but he had put tin on top and put rocks on top of that. And you gotta give him an A for effort, because he was committed to trying to keep water from infiltrating the tops of the bales. But what the research shows us is that more water comes up from the bottom than actually infiltrates from the top. And also that net wrap, like you see here, will shed water better than twine, even if it is straight on the ground. I wanted to show you this because it's some real nice work done by Kevin Shinners at the University of Wisconsin, showing the moisture distribution in net wrapped hay over time. This is after 5 months, after 11. The bales on the left are on a pallet, the bales on the right are on the ground. And you can see the direction that the rain is coming. It's coming from this side. The bluer is wetter. And you can see here that after 5 months, you've got more water coming in from the bottom than you do coming from the side. after 11 months, on the ground, then we got issues. But you can tell that the pallet still got the weathering moisture, but it was better than on the ground. Let's move on. I just want to mention this really quickly, and I don't know if you've run up against it, and I've never seen a baler in Kentucky with this able to put this stuff on or ready to put this stuff on. But this is a new product called B-Wrap, or breathable net wrap. And I mean, they're straight out of the advertisement. It sheds water, but lets moisture out of the bale. And is, in point of fact, that's what it does. I mean, the research shows that this bale stored outside will have similar characteristics to that very same bale stored inside. The problem is it costs $5 over the cost of net wrap. So it's not a trivial thing, but it may be something that, depending on your situation, may be able to help. And again, I was able to find this option in a John Deere equipment, but no doubt there are others that will let you put this type of material on. Okay, so, to sum it up, making quality stored forage is not easy. I mean, we got a lot of steps. We got a lot of things that we need to try to do as right as we can. But I'll end with this one thought. There are very, very few bad hays, but a heck of a lot of really bad diets. So get the hay tested and figure out how good it is and feed it appropriately. I might mention the fact that we've done a lot of baleage work, and I don't know how well that has caught on for you, but it has gotten to be quite common. And the thing that bothered me for a long period of time is a lot of our literature will say that, what the right parameters are for good baleage, and we never got there. I mean, you could test the fermentation all you want, and we never got the pH as low as it needs to be, or the lactic acid as high as it needed to be. And we did a lot of work to try to figure out why, and dug a lot in the literature and found out that, baleage, in fact, doesn't ferment very well unless it's perfect. But if you've wrapped it tight enough and wrapped it with enough plastic, it's going to keep and feed just fine. And it made, I felt like, us have better answers for our producers.
Dr. Henning, this is Jim. Do you have any experience with using inoculants or anything like that on the baleage?
That's a good question. And no, I have not. And we don't have any producers yet that I have worked with that let me look at a with and without. But I do think we've done some work with inoculants. I need to go back and talk about that. We had some fall cut tall fescue, which is, you're familiar with that, and it's going to be high in sugar content, high in protein, and should ferment like a charm. But actually what we found was that after you get some freeze events on this, the material is still green, but the numbers of fermenting bacteria are down on the surface. And we did a master's project where we had tall fescue baled and plastic wrapped with and without inoculum. Where we put the inoculum on, it fermented fine. Where we did not, it did not ferment. So I think that's, then there's plenty of evidence that says, hey, I mean, silage inoculants do work. So those spring cuttings, the fall cuttings in particular, where you, where you may have the low numbers of bacteria on the naturally occurring on the surface, can help us out. And I think it can help in some cases when you get into higher moisture contents, where that you may get some clostridial fermentation because of the moisture content. Adding an inoculum in those borderline cases can help stimulate the lactic acid production and maybe get it to a low pH quick enough that you don't get clostridial fermentation.
Thank you. Valerie,
Yes, we've had a couple questions come in. One of them was, I wrapped some alfalfa and went to feed it, had a strong ammonia smell. What went wrong?
Oh, that's a good question. One of the main reasons we get ammonia in a bale is clostridial fermentation. When you do a fermentation panel test, if you have the amount of nitrogen as ammonia in that bale, if it's more than 15%, that's an indication that you've had Clostridial fermentation. Now, there are 6 types of Clostridia at least that you may find in a bale, and only one of them causes botulism. So, the fact that you may smell ammonia is not going to be unusual for an alfalfa baleage sample, maybe on the wet side, I would guess. Alfalfa has so much protein, it's really natural for the deamination and the release of the amine groups and making ammonia in the bale. That's a natural occurrence. Where I think that it's going to be enough to smell is going to be when it's wet and you've had, some secondary fermentation go on. Probably a lot of that feeds just fine. With maybe there's a little bit of an intake hit over what would have happened if it'd been perfect, right? So that's what I would guess is going on.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more. How big does a producer need to be to justify the cost of switching from baleage? How big of a producer does it take to justify the cost of switching to baleage and purchasing a wrapper?
Oh, great question. And I'm going to have to be upfront and say I don't have. Well, I'm not an ag economist, and they don't let me talk about ag economists either. The price of a wrapper will vary a lot. I mean, whether you buy it new or used and things like that. But frankly, the cost of the plastic is about the cost of putting up a pole barn for us. By the time, well, all things being said, you can probably make a pole barn. So the plastic cost is a wash. Wrappers can cost, in the $20,000 and $30,000. So it totally depends on how many bales you make, and that's the point of your question: is how big do you have to be? Well, how many bales do you make, and how fast do you want to pay it off? And then the other thing is how bad of how much do you save with the hay? And there's a lot of variables in that. If the alternative is losing a lot to rain damage, storing it outside, then you've got a lot to put on to put towards the baler that you're giving up every year. So you're going to have to put some of those costs together of losses in addition to your farm size to figure out, exactly what the economics are for buying a wrapper.
All right, thank you. We'll have to put one of our ag economists on that question, won't we?
You got a bunch of them over there. They can do it.
All right. I have one more question. Have you had issues with TEF establishment?
Yes. TEF is a really small seeded plant. And I should say I've had lots of issues with establishment. I've made every single mistake you can make. But with TEF, the prepared seed beds are better. Seed placement needs to be really shallow, and a cultipacking roller is your best friend. So if using a no-till drill, I would say I'm not good enough to use a no-till drill in an established TEF. You just have to be at an 1/8 of an inch, and very few drills are going to give you that much control over that small light seed.
All right, thank you very much. I don't have any other questions, and if anyone else has a question, again, unmute because we're running down to our last minute or two. That's all I have, Jim.
Again, thank you, Valerie. Anybody else have any final questions for Dr. Henning? Well, Dr. Henning, I really appreciate you being on our program today. Excellent job. And the thing is, a question I have, and I think you and I talked about earlier, what's your thoughts on this cold weather and the impact on our yields? I mean, because we got some pretty cold temperatures. While they're not as bad as they were 14 years ago, they're still pretty significant for a lot of us.
They are. And because of, we've had this a couple times here as well, we went back and looked at historic data, and I'm afraid the best way to know is after your first cutting is done. I don't think we can predict that, but I do know that the 2007, which was bad for us as well as you, we laid alfalfa and red clover absolutely flat on the ground. There was no mystery that it was hurt. And, you know, our yields suffered accordingly. I sent Jim, you know, I sent you a publication that has some pictures and a working theory of ours about how to predict whether or not you may be very sensitive to low temperature damage in alfalfa in particular. But we're seeing some singed orchard grass heads as well. So I do expect us to have lost some first cutting yield. How much, you know, will depend on how early maturing the variety is, and, you know, just when we get it harvested.
Again, thank you, sir. Glad you could be on with us today.
Me too.
It's 1 o'clock. I again want to thank everybody for participating this week. And we will try to get that. I've shared that that publication with our group, and we will try to find a way to get it put out to everybody that was on the call today. So thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day. And again, thank you, Dr. Henning.
Thank you.